Okay, it says that I am live now. A friend of mine was in a Discord server, one that is set up for the Frog God games. It's actually their company Discord. And we were talking about doing various projects for Swords and Wizardry and other affiliated items from the Frog Gods product line. And he started explaining that he was having trouble with possibly doing a video review of their flagship product, Swords and Wizardry. Now, for those of you that are unaware about Swords and Wizardry, I'm going to tell you that it is a very much a harkening back to the original days of Dungeons and Dragons. Before there was an advanced, this was they had Dungeons and Dragons. And my friend here, SD Houston, has fallen in love with the game. And there's a lot to love about it. But when you look at a system, as most people do when they first get a hold of it, they have a tendency to really not look at the system from a broad perspective. They go into it and they talk to you about the various chapters and about the various rules, and then they try to pull you in and say, hey, listen, we have all these options and da 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 da. But Swords and Wizardry is not like that. And I think it's fair for me to bring in SD Houston now. Please welcome him in. And hello, sir.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
All right. We have got SD Houston here on the other end. And for those of you that are going to be watching us later, I thank you so much. Mr. Houston, before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of this game, I'm just going to go over like a gamer table cred sort of thing. How many years have you been playing the game?
On and off for almost 30 years now.
Okay. About 30 years. So you were basically involved with it back around, say, like second edition AD&D times. And was that one of your mainstays when you were growing up?
Um, when I started, it was pretty much just before third came out, I believe, third edition.
Okay.
So you had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you had second edition AD&D. But when I started playing, it was in junior high, my last year of junior high, and we were playing in study hall, and our DM, all he had was the old basic edition, basic and expert sets. So we started out playing BX. We were essentially, I guess you could say, behind the times in a lot of senses. So it wasn't until a couple of years later that I even got to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I think I actually skipped over advanced, went straight to second edition after VX, and then kind of jumped around back and forth. Played some third 3.5 when that came out. That actually didn't last very long. I actually preferred third edition over 3.5, but yeah, so there wasn't a whole lot of order in the getting through the
Well,
editions.
well, the main thing is that what I've noticed from the various people that I know in the game and various developers or people like us that we find a system and we really like it, we might time travel and we might go back in time to say the 80s or to the late 70s and find something we really enjoy because somebody was really excited to write about it, and that spilled over to us maybe through the artwork or maybe through just the paragraphs upon paragraphs of rules and such. But it was not uncommon for us to skip editions of a game entirely and maybe start with like the second or third edition of a game and then really, fall in love with it. And we might bump into somebody later who's like, oh, well, we've been playing this since it first came out, and if you're not part of the game, if you don't play that, then you're really not a gamer. You lose street cred, it seems like, if you do that, if you're not part of the early adapters. And a lot of us aren't. A lot of us joined up because our relatives or people on the school bus we knew played it. And so we were introduced to it like that. And so we had small games as a kid growing up, like 40-minute sessions, talking to friends in study hall or such like that on the school bus ride home. And it's quite okay to do that because the game is meant to be picked up and put down. No matter what game it is, it could be GURPS or D&D or Rule Master. I just feel like that's the great thing about tabletop RPGs is that you can pick it up, you can put them down, and you can go years or days without playing a game. And when you step back at the table, you get your dopamine back. You get that little high, like, I'm not doing this. I'm not in the real world. I'm playing somebody else doing possibly heroic things.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
understand what I mean?
And as far as edition hopping, I mean, when I was growing up, for the longest time, it was really not as much about which edition or which system you wanted to play. I mean, there was that aspect, but a lot of it boiled down also to what was available, who had what system and was running games, or, what could I find at the bookstore, which edition was available at the bookstore that I could pick up and learn, to try to run a game, that sort of thing. So a lot of it was a matter of convenience as much as it was, hey, I love this system or I love this particular edition. So,
And I can thoroughly understand that. When I was growing up, I was 15 minutes away from Decatur, Illinois. One of the local one of the cornerstones of the RPG industry, because it was actually mentioned in the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. They actually talk about Decatur because that was where Judges Guild was located, and that was the only other place you could get authentic first edition modules was Judges Guild. And so we kind of had our group there that had started, but I was oblivious to Judges Guild for many years. I didn't know about it. It was 15 minutes away, but it was worlds away to me because I wasn't exposed to it. So I totally get that. And I totally get edition hopping because you're right. It's who you're exposed to, who's in your circles, who's in your study hall, or who do you go to, recess with, or whose lunch table do you sit at? And that was mainly how I was exposed to the game in and of itself. So I was wondering about that. So you're very familiar with second edition and third and 3.5 a little bit, correct?
oh, absolutely. God, I liked first edition. Don't get me wrong, it was a great system, but it was just the organization was completely chaos in those books. So I actually preferred second edition over that for that reason. Um, Even though first edition was interesting because it was more along the lines of the original, where it was more kind of you go in, you play these guys that are breaking into dungeons and stealing, the monsters' crap, things like that. Where second edition went more towards the you're the good guys fighting evil, so it had more of that emphasis in that aspect. But and I like playing it, but once I found SpellJammer, God, for the longest time, that was it. I was like hooked. I loved that one.
You
But
really liked Spelljammer then.
huh?
You really like Spelljammer.
Oh, I loved SpellJammer back then.
That's funny because I was on Legion of Myth about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking, and the main host of the stream was ranting about how much he hated it, and I'm like, I don't know. I read through Spelljammer's box set, and it's hard not to get really excited when you read that because you're talking about we're sailing between worlds, and then you talk about it, and if you've read through the box set, you start almost talking in code. We're going to go into the flow. We're going to go really fast. We'll be on this planet in the next couple days. And before you know it, you're really jazzed to play a campaign of it all.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun playing that one. It's that's one of those settings that it's really a love-hate relationship. Um, what I found though is if you're doing a lot of homebrew with your worlds, that you're going back and forth to, it makes it a lot more interesting because if you're just going to say, from Forgotten Realms across the, Phlogiston to Grey Hawk or, to the, what was it, Reds?
Dark Sun?
No, not Dark Sun. The Red something. What was that?
Oh, Red Steel. You mean Mistara?
Yes. If you're just traveling back and forth between the published settings, it kind of gets a little redundant to an extent. But if you've got a good DM who's doing a lot of homebrew worlds for you to travel to, it gets to be a lot of fun. But it's definitely one of those settings that's a love hate. You love it or you hate it. So there's not a whole lot of in between. That was about the time that I found Warhammer 40,000 too, and so I think that kind of gave me a little boost in that direction as well.
I could understand that. I can absolutely understand that.
What's really interesting is I found Warhammer 40,000 about 2 years before I realized there was Warhammer Fantasy, like before that.
we we never really got into the 40K stuff until Necromunda came out in 96, 97, and we were into that for about a year and a half, and then they discontinued it, and I discovered what GW does, and I didn't like how their system was set up, where they would have a specialized game for 2 years, and you'd get into it, you get like $1,000 or $1,500 into it, and then they just drop it on to the next game. It was maddening. We didn't like that. So anyway, we kept playing that. Although when Mordheim came out, we really liked Mordheim. But I wanted to talk to you about this game called Swords and Wizardry,
Oh yeah.
and that was the entire reason why we discussed this, and we're 12 minutes into it. I'm sure Pex is like, "What the fuck, Bruce? Why aren't you talking about Swords and Wizardry?" Well, I wanted just to have the audience, whenever they listen to this, I want to make sure they understand where you're coming from and that you're a gamer. You're not some casual that, well, you'd like to play it, or no, you've done this over decades.
Oh yeah.
You might not have a game to your credit per se, and most of us don't. Most of us might be a playtester at best. There are very
Or con
few
one.
developers or module writers out there, and I'm not saying that we can't do that later on, but I want to talk to you about Swords and Wizardry, and mainly my first question for you. You were wanting to do this when you open up Swords and Wizardry as a consumer. What does it hit you with?
When you open it up, it hits you with, if you're a veteran gamer with a love for the old school, it hits you with the nostalgia factor. If you're a new player, one of the first things you see is just sheer simplicity, just the beauty of simple, easy to comprehend rules. You don't see a whole lot of extravagant artwork outside of the cover. Errol Lotus was a genius with the artwork on these books. But inside, it's simple but quality artwork, and it catches your eye, it catches your interest, but it doesn't overbear the book itself, which is always a good thing. They did a really good job with the design aspect in that regard. But when you start reading through, you realize that it's really simple to understand. It's really simple to grasp. Even if you're coming from being used to the heavy, cumbersome, clunky, mechanical systems like
You're talking like maybe Rollmaster or Pathfinder, I'm assuming.
right, or any of the later editions of D&D, any of the third, fourth, fifth editions. So when you look through it, it's just you can't not comprehend things when you're reading through it, and that's one of the aspects that I like about it. Is it's been I don't think I've seen another retro clone that has pulled so many players to it from the more recent editions. And you've got, for Gold or Glory for AD&D Second Edition, you've got Osric for First, you've got OSE, and the previous version, I'm not even going to try to remember the name right. Old School is not
Old
old.
Tool Essentials.
Yes, but that's actually a rewrite of the original version of that one. I was trying to recall the name, but I can't.
Rule Cyclopedia.
No, no, it was the same writer that wrote OSE. It was just a remake of his particular clone that he
Okay.
had done. Um, so anyway, I digress. Yeah, there's a lot of these retro clones that have come out, and I've never seen one grasp so many of the newer generation players as what Swords and Wizardry has
So
done.
you're saying it's easier to grab somebody who's new to the game that's kind of into fifth edition, probably not like a big consumer of it. They don't have like the PH, the PH2, the DMG, a bunch of hardcovers at home. They might have like 3 hardcovers or less, and they might tell you they want to play fifth edition. But you're saying that when you show them Swords and Wizardry, they get into it a little easier. And this isn't just for younger players. This is for people that are newer to the game then.
Right. Well, I mean, it's both sides of the spectrum. I mean, you've got people that are just coming into the game. They're looking for something, an easy game to get into, and old school games generally tend to have plenty of openings for where new players can get into without having to worry about knowing a whole lot of rules, spending forever trying to come up with a character concept, things like that. So it's a good move into gaming in general from there, but there's something about it that catches the attention of more seasoned, newer generation players as well. My games that I've been running over the last several years, most of my players have come from fourth edition and then fifth edition, Pathfinder 3.5. So I've probably gotten more of those players over the last 10 years or so, than I have actual old school players.
Okay. So that kind of piques my interest right there because I know there's a lot of people in our circles that are involved with either Tinker's Tavern or with the Frog God Games server, maybe even the
Right.
Troll Lord Games people.
Yep.
But there's a lot of
Uh-huh.
people that fit in that demographic for the past decade. They've been gamers
Hmm.
and they really like just being able to play, and that's something that I'm going to see as a benefit to it. Would you say that the game is simplistic? Would you say the game opens itself for rule interpretations, or would you say that somebody that okay, let's say that somebody is 40 something like me or you possibly, and they have a habit of when they start a game, they have a trapper keeper because they got to put their new rules in the trapper keeper. Would you say that this lends itself pretty easy to that?
Oh, absolutely. That's
Explain.
the beauty of it is you don't have a heavy rule set, so you don't the game isn't trying to cover everything under the sun. So, before like up front. So you've got plenty of leeway to make judgment calls on the fly, create rules as you feel like you need them or create rules to suit your particular game. Which is part of the beauty of it, where you take fifth edition or Pathfinder, for instance, you still have some aspect of homebrewing that goes on, but for the most part, a lot of the game is honestly just rules as written. because there are so many things, and you worry about if you change one thing, are you going to break something else? It's too many cogs in the system, so to speak, and moving or changing one cog could detrimentally affect something else. And with these older systems, like older base systems like this, you don't have that issue.
So you're saying that it's pretty easy for somebody who wants to be a GM, and they could just pick up the S&W complete rulebook, and they could just go to town on not rewriting it, but say tailoring it to their own game world and making the rules fit the narrative.
Absolutely.
Okay, because what I'm hearing from you and what I've read from others is that, and I don't want to rely on others during our conversation here. I want people to get an idea that if I need to know about S&W, I have you right in front of me, and I can ask you about it, and you could either quote rules, or according to the way that S&W is written, you can just make a ruling right there.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, there's, like I said, you've got the groundwork, and that's basically what you have, which means that if something comes up, and you need to make a ruling on the fly, you've got the tools at your disposal right there. I mean, half the time a ruling on the fly is just, a judgment call or roll a d6. It's that easy. Um,
That sounds very simple.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so basically, you've got the majority of the rule book. I'll just ask this: the majority of the rule book, is it geared to basically giving out your options as like what classes and races are available, or would you say that's a minimalist and majority of the rule book might be something else entirely?
If you're going straight up old school, you have the races class thing, which means that the demi-humans are limited to particular classes, and level limits, that sort of thing.
Are you saying that, like, we're going back to dwarf level 4, halfling level 2?
Right, dwarf is level 6 fighter limit, I believe. And then of course with Swords and Wizardry complete core and complete, because they added stuff from the supplements and the gazetteers, they get a little more extensive with their options. However, the way that Swords and Wizardry is written, because the classes and the races are actually separate listings as opposed to the old, the original D&D races class, where everything was just listed as a class. So what this does is actually open up the doors that if you wanted to say play a ranger, which is a human only class, but you wanted to play an elf ranger or you wanted to play a dwarf ranger, you could easily do that without any kind of modifications whatsoever, because of the fact that they've said that Matt Finch did a great job of actually separating those, which to me is great for that for that purpose right there, while at the same time still kind of a pet peeve. But it's
Okay.
it is what it is. So you can play it. You can play it either way right there, because you can literally read it as any class can play, any race can play any class.
Wait. Any race can play any class. That's kind of different from second ed or first ed, where I don't remember if dwarves could play a paladin or not.
Right.
Okay.
First edition opened up and broke away from the concept of racist class, for the most part. But there still were certain classes that could only be played technically by humans.
Yeah.
Um, However, how many groups actually played that way?
I'm going to be a total douche and be like, you should probably not be surprised that I've made my players deal with level limits.
Oh, my players do too. They deal with the class. They deal with the class restrictions. They deal with the level limits. So I mean, I play it like it's original D&D.
That's badass.
Oh yeah. They love it. They have fun. They have a great time.
Now, whenever it comes to like getting a group together, pretty much everybody already has an idea of what they want to play, or is it one of those games where you roll your statistics first and then you choose?
Um, Most of the time, I just let them roll and then choose. Now, I'm actually getting ready to play run an original D&D game, like the actual original white box, where I'm going to be rolling their stats and they're going to have to choose their class based on their stats. I mean, so
Ouch.
that's going to be interesting, but that's a whole nother topic. That's the traditional way to play original D&D. That was Gary Gygax, Arneson style, down right down the line, 3d6 down the line, choose your character. Although I think they actually, I've heard Gary Gygax actually did roll 46, drop the lowest.
I've heard that a
Yeah,
couple times. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not really worried about it.
right. I've heard that. Like I said, it's just hearsay, so I can't verify it, but I could see it because I've heard that, and I've heard that he actually usually started his players at level 3, just because he wanted his players, as deadly as his games were, he still wanted them to start out having a fighting chance. So, but I'm a big fan of 3d6 down the line, honestly. But with my Swords and Wizardry games, especially with newer players to the game, newer players to role playing, and then players who are used to the highly overpowered, later edition systems,
Hmm.
I kind of give them a break and let them just, roll their 3d6 and put them where they want. And then I'll usually give them like 2 extra points to put into whichever other stat they want.
Makes sense.
So
That makes a lot of sense.
yeah. So I'm a hard ass on my games, but I'm not a total douche. I'm not trying to like make sure my players can't have a chance to survive.
Well, I mean, everybody runs their game differently, and I'm not trying to say anything positive or negative about that. I just every GM is different, and most of us realize that. Like I run my games differently than you, who run differently than Chantel, then run differently than Laramie Wall, and that's just how we all are. We all run our games just a little bit different. It's
Oh yeah.
it's mainly just the trappings, but in the end, we're really happy to socialize and to have a table full of people willing to play and deal with the problems in this imaginary world. And that's, I think, what all of us are in it for. Um, so I guess we could say that from what you're saying, you can either run Swords and Wizardry as like a basic D&D game to where you have race as class, or if you so choose, you can make the races available for any or all classes, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You
Okay.
technically could, like I said, without any kind of modifications of, even necessary, just because of the fact that he did actually split the classes and the races up into separate sections. Even though he still wrote them technically as races class, but he didn't make it any word to actually divide anything for, trying to figure out your experience points for the next levels or anything like that.
He wants people to have sit down and be able to play, and have a
Yeah,
good time.
absolutely.
It's hard to do that whenever you're like, I wanted to play an elven ranger and you're stuck playing a halfling with an intelligence of 4. Nobody
Right.
wants to do that. Um,
Now, part of the trick too is trying to figure. Now, there is a little bit of work in trying to figure out, for instance, because with the complete rules, he added in the half elf into the races.
Matt
So
did that.
that I kind of have to work with that a little bit because being half elf means he's also half human.
Okay.
So I try to work it so that he has certain access to a couple of the extra classes, like the druid or the ranger, even possibly even the assassin. The monk and the paladin, no, not so much. But I also kind of give those an option because he has the option of either fighter or the 3-time multi-class fighter, cleric, thief, I believe, or magic user. Um, which cleric magic user to me doesn't make any sense. Plus, if you're running 3 characters and you got to split all your experience evenly between 3 classes, you're never gonna hit freaking level 2
You're
before the
never going to
party
get to level
gets
three,
like
level
level
four, level
6.
six. You're
So
never going to cast Fireball.
yeah, so I limited it. I limited it to fighter, and then your choice of class, magic user or cleric, or you could choose to be like a druid or a ranger or something of that sort.
Okay. Um, Whenever you're getting the characters geared up, is there like an extensive equipment section, or is that part there just pretty sparse? Like this does this, here's this, and would you say that the game lets you kit your characters out pretty easily?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you've got all the basic necessities there. You don't have a lot of extra fluff items and things of that sort, just trying to make, a big, impressive equipment list, but you've got enough to do the job. No, hands down. Anything else you can easily, find in a shop somewhere or something without. But just to get you started, there's plenty there on the equipment list.
Okay. Well, like the main thing I want to know is that like I'm getting this idea in my head that I could basically write this character up on like a 3x5 index card.
Oh yeah, definitely. As a matter of fact, I believe somewhere they've got a 3x5 character, 3x5 index card size character sheet published. So yeah.
That would make it pretty nice to have that. I'm a big fan of whenever I run a game, if I have players that are at my table, I will have if I have to, I'll just grab an index card and I'll write something up with the game rules on it and hand it to that player character. That way they know you like this is an inventory card, and when you give this up, you've gotten rid of it either for money or you gave it to somebody at the table. I don't care which, but this is a piece of inventory. Have this index card, and so I'll do that, and that's basically because there was a Paizo had a adventuring pack and they had these little card kits that you'd buy and you could get like various items in your card kit. There'd be like 9 cards. One would be a lamp oil, one would be this. And it was kind of just a helpful little thing. And you could have like this stack of cards in your inventory off to your side. You wouldn't have to write it down, just have it next to you at the table. And it had the game rules on it. So it was easy for them to put it in their Pathfinder game when they later made that. And I thought that was a neat idea, but I didn't want to buy cards at the store. I could just write it down on index cards.
Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
how does combat work? Is it pretty easy?
I've always found combat to be pretty easy to run. I mean, it's really no harder or easier than most other systems. I mean, if you're just depending on how you GM it, it can take you know half an hour, take 10 minutes. Most of my combats usually go by pretty quick. We don't run the initiative, individual initiative. We run the party initiative. Um, with the phases, missile or missile and move spell declaration before the roll, then missile and movement, then melee, and then you know resolving spell effects, then any secondary fire, secondary attacks. So it moves things along pretty fast for the most part. It's easy to run. It's a little more work kind of keeping up with things when you're running party initiative, but it's fast. I find it faster than individual initiative.
When you say that, say like you have a party combat with against like 3 or 4 kobolds, is it set up well for theater of the mind, or is it better for having miniature combat?
Um, Same with any other system. It really boils down to how well the GM can portray the situation, the scene and the situation. Um, so theater of the mind is really more on the GM and the players than it is the system. Um, I like theater of the mind, although I don't do just full out everything in your imagination. I'll still, because somebody's going to have, if we're going to be doing that, somebody's still going to have to be mapping. So there's still, a grid map, even if it's just,
Okay.
just like a handheld size map. Then we'll still have miniatures or tokens, just representing basic marching order, or, representing general position within a combat scenario. But they won't be, it's just reference. That's all that is. So you still have that, but you don't have the lockdown of, okay, well, I'm moving 10 feet here. I'm moving 5 squares over here, can I make this over there 30, is that 30 feet? Is play it fast and loose. That's about the best way I can put it. You don't have to have literal distances on everything. Is this guy close enough that I can make a charge? That I can charge at this guy? Yeah, absolutely. Or no, he's just a little bit short of your movement rate, but he'll probably be moving in closer to you before you actually get your chance to move. So once he moves, go for it. That sort of thing. So,
Okay. So it could be either or. It just
right.
all really depends.
Yeah. It's like I said, with theater of the mind, it's not really on the system, although it seems better suited for old school systems, but that's not always necessarily the case. It really boils down to the creativeness and the description and the ability to describe things to the players, by the GM, so that they know what's going on, who's where, what's what. At the same time, that also relies on a group of players that's actually going to pay attention when you're describing these things too.
What? I didn't hear what you said.
I
I fucking hate players that do that shit.
know, right?
Use my French. Oh no, I gotta do 6 laps for Orcus. I cussed on stream. This is not an official. I guess I should have done this disclaimer earlier. This is not an official Frog God server video. This is a stream from one man who does happen to love Frog God games and Black Rifle Coffee, but not any of the comments that are made by myself or my guest are not exactly the necessary. Excuse me. They're not necessarily the feelings or opinions of Frog God Games, their owners, or their staff. Disclaimer over. I saw you had the book up there.
Oh yeah,
You have the hardcover there?
that is the hardcover. That
I'm gonna
is the one
hold
I
on. I'm gonna
got
zoom in
way
on you.
back at the Kickstarter.
That is a sharp looking book. Errol Otis did that, correct?
Yes, that
I'm
is the Arrow Lotus cover, as is the Core Rules book.
a large fan of that.
Yes,
Really
I
am.
know. I love this cover so much.
I'm a very big fan for Errol Otis. I really wish that we had more people that knew of him, but it seems like it's always the 70 to 40-year-old people that are like, Errol Otis, oh my God, I love him. And like the younger
Right.
kids, the Gen X are like, who? Who? Yeah, yeah. Sad day.
Has a long-standing name in the OSR in the
In the
gaming
gaming
industry.
industry, the guy is a freaking legend.
Yep.
Uh, okay. So how long have you ran Swords and Wizardry?
I've been running this for. I couldn't even tell you right now. It's been a while. I found this and I started running it maybe 2 years before the complete Kickstarter.
Okay.
Yeah, because I found the core rules, and then shortly after that, and I fell in love with the core rules. This was before Complete, about 2 years before Complete came out. So I found the core rules about 6 months after that. I found the white box rules, and
What is the difference between those?
okay, so the white box rules is just the easiest way to say it is pure original D&D white box set. With a couple of slight changes, like that's when he implemented the single save system. Instead of having 5 different saves, you have one saving throw number. Um, and he did incorporate the thief class as an optional in the white box version, as he does with the rest of them, which wasn't actually available in the original D&D white box. So, other than a couple of slight changes like that, for the most part, it's straight up original D&D, only without the Gary's archaic and arcane language that he always tend to write in. So he took that game, cleaned up the language, made it a lot easier to actually read, to understand, clarified some of the more vague rules. Even in the books, you'll notice that he even like kind of explains some of the processes in writing it, which is pretty awesome that he does that. But he basically made the book accessible to everybody, as far as comprehension goes, which is a huge bonus for it. But then again, that's what Matt Finch does. I mean, look at Osric. I mean, that's a perfect example, you know. So
I'm not familiar
if
with
you're a first
Osric.
edition
I
AD&D
apologize.
fan, hmm?
I'm not familiar with Osric. I know I know I'm in the group with everybody, but I don't have Osric.
Right. Well,
So I'm gonna need you to back up and just like give us 5 minutes to explain about Osric real quick.
Okay. Um, Well, okay, so Matt Finch, way back before Swords and Wizardry, wrote Osric, which was the old school rules. I forgot what the IC part stood for. So anyway, it was basically this explanation and kind of breaking down the original AD&D rules, the first edition rules. And it became really popular with the first edition with the first edition crowd. But it wasn't it wasn't playable. It wasn't technically a rule set that was playable. So he wrote the second edition of Osric, which was literally a first edition AD&D retro clone. Has been
Okay.
hugely popular. But one of the things he did was he took a lot of the rules, the more archaic rules, and made them easier to grasp, easier to read and understand. And so when he wrote Swords of Wizardry, as far at least I'm just theorizing this. I'm not saying that that's the case, but it's basically what happened. Is he took that same concept and brought that to original Dungeons and Dragons, and wrote White Box, which, to my understanding, if I remember right from an interview, was actually a friend of his that passed away a while back. But I guess he actually, when he wrote White Box, was actually at this other guy's request.
Hmm.
So it was a pretty interesting little story there.
And it's really sad if you go through the list of names from the first generation of advanced D&D and Dungeons and Dragons writers. If you go through the list of people involved with it that have started to leave the mortal coil, they're shuffling off here faster than what I want to deal with myself. Um, there's a lot in the past 5 years that have left. I mean, Gary and Dave both departed back in, I think, the 2007 year,
Out there, yeah.
and then everybody else kind of just followed quickly after, and it's been kind of a ongoing problem with myself emotionally, but that's just me because I don't want to let go of the pillars of my childhood.
Most people don't.
No,
But
that's why you see 50-year-old and 40-year-old men crying at their grandparents, funerals like little babies, like they lost their dog.
oh yeah,
Um, but it's just one of those things where we're seeing that happen more and more, and I think Matt Finch has done everybody a real service by, from what you're saying, compiling these various rule sets and re-releasing them, not really to make quote unquote money, but to breathe life into it again, because a lot of people will still play these games. There's still plenty of campaigns for first ed and basic and Beck Me going on right now in
oh
people's basements and people's garages. People are streaming this on the web. They've discovered Discord and MeWe. They've got their group set up from Google Plus. We miss you, Google Plus. And I think you've got a lot of people that are out there that when they see something like Swords and Wizardry, I think from the feeling I'm getting is that they're going back in time 20 or 30 years, and they have a chance to bring back the happiness and some good times from when they were younger to the crowd that's around them now. And not that fifth edition or a cumbersome heavy rule set like Pathfinder first or second ed or fourth edition or Rollmaster. God, Rollmaster, I love you, but they're not that these can't be having fun with, but if you're telling me that within 10 minutes I can get a character generated and ready to play,
pretty much,
all
yeah.
all right. Is there a lot of is there a skills and a feats chapter for this? Because I mean,
No,
I'm mainly like I started in Beck Me myself, but I uh, I want to know, is there like skills and feats available with this game, or no?
no, there are not. Which is part of the charm with this game is the fact that you don't have skill checks and things of that nature. Now, a lot of GMs will incorporate ability checks where, you roll a d20 and you want to roll under your particular ability to try to accomplish something or avoid something. But that's just a popular house rule. I use it occasionally. I try not to make it a reliance or a crutch, which is what often happens whenever you start doing things like that. But that's one of the charms, though, is most of the time it is about the role play and the narration. People from the newer generation think that, oh well, we don't role play or we don't, this or that, and it's like, little do you know, we actually, back when I was playing, we didn't have skill checks, we didn't have, feeds and all these other abilities. We had to role play and explain what we were doing to see, to determine whether or not we were going to succeed or fail at something. Where, most of newer editions, you're really not role playing so much. You're rolling a die and then, reacting to the results of that die. So it's more like improv comedy where you're not just coming up with your own thing. You're, you know, doing something at the prompt of an audience member, you know. And so newer editions, that's kind of that concept. Whereas older editions, you had to role play through things. You didn't even necessarily have to role play, like get all, digging the character and that sort of thing. But you had to be aware of what you were doing. You had to be able to explain it. You had to narrate, hey, well, my character's doing this. He's looking for this and this particular thing. He's searching this, trying this. There was no, roll a check to see if you find traps, that sort of thing. It's if you wanted to find a trap, you had to explain what you're looking for, where you're looking, what are you doing while you're looking? If there's a mechanism to open up open up a door that you can't figure out that you can't just simply open, you got to find that mechanism. Maybe it's one of the torches along, on either side of the door. You've got to be able to explain that, hey, well, I'm going to play with these torches, push and pull them, see what happens. So it really rewards players for thinking smart, where a lot of editions don't. They consider it metagaming, that sort of thing. Now, metagaming, bad, always. But there's a point where player knowledge is just as important as what your character knows, if not more so.
Okay. So it sounds like a fairly easy game to play, and it's not based in a lot of mechanics or game speak,
No,
right?
exactly.
Would you say it's pretty easy to plop out and show your friends or show family or people that are just kind of like say we have like a normal Thanksgiving this year and people come over, we go to places and there's 5 people, 6 people sitting around and we're kind of looking like we're not going to fall asleep, but we're done eating and there's another 3 hours we got to be together. Would you say that this is a pretty easy way to interact, pass the time, and just have a good time with everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you don't got to take your family into a dungeon. You could probably entertain your family by
Right.
interacting in town between the bar, the inn, and the mayor's office.
Yep.
Probably most people won't get much further than that. They're like, that was really weird. But
No,
most quote unquote normies would do that, and they're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I played D&D." Well, no,
right.
you were just playing it. You had an
Take
index
them through a
card. That's
little
your character
simple
sheet.
fee adventure. That's
Yeah. Um, so you could pop that out and take you about maybe 20 minutes, get 5 players ready to go, right?
yep.
Okay, so it's got portability, it's got ease of use. You're saying that you've got the ability to put it in front of new people and probably capture their imaginations, something they haven't brought out of hiding for many years. Oh, look at the pretty game colors on screen. They're not even worried about things like that.
Right. And see,
Um,
one of the great things too is if you want to get a quick game together, you got a couple options. You got Swords and Wizardry Light or Continual Light, which takes like 5 minutes max to put a character together. But if most people aren't going to want to go just for a quick game for Thanksgiving. They're not going to want to go and get a whole new little system, even though you're technically not getting a new system. You just break out your Swords and Wizardry book. You roll up roll up your hit points. Figure out, what are you playing. Let's get your basic gear together. Give you a backpack, bedroll, your weapon, your armor. Spell book if you need it, or a holy symbol. Boom, you're good to go.
hmm, it's really not bad.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And then you can get those together and just figure out the rest as you go.
one of our friends from Tinkers is watching us. The Witch King.
Oh yeah. Hey Riz, what's up?
Rez, if you want, go ahead and post in our chat. If you so desire, we'll bring you in the panel here. I'm kind of wrapping up the main thing. I just wanted to make it easy for you to talk about the game system because I didn't want you to feel like there was uh, anything where you might feel awkward or you're in front of the camera for minutes on end, maybe an hour. I wanted you to feel relaxed, and I figured by asking you questions, you'd be able to pop them off, and you're coming back pretty naturally. The big question I want to have is that like, does it play well for long games?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've run a couple of pretty long, not like 3, 4, 5 year, campaigns, but I mean I've run a couple of games that lasted for, at least a couple of years. I'm currently on I want to say month 7 of maybe a little bit longer than 7 or 8 of my current campaign.
Okay,
And my players are still only about level 2. So,
that, that's
in
okay.
general, unless you got a GM that's really lax with the treasure, yeah, leveling is a little slower. But then again, when you figure a lot of games don't go past, a lot of old school games don't go past level 7 or 8 generally anyway. I mean, some of them do, some of mine have. But generally about 7 or 8 they cap out. But, by then you're pretty powerful and about ready to retire in a lot of cases anyway. But then again, it also depends on how well the GM can keep up with keeping you challenged past that point if you want to keep going past there too. But yeah, I forgot what the point was.
Well,
Oh
no,
yeah,
I just want
yeah,
to know if like it
it's
plays
definitely
well in the
good for a
long
long
game.
term campaign.
Okay. So, like, you're seeing around level 7, level 9, most GMs and players are like, all right, we're going to be wrapping this up here. I got too many friends that play Wizards, and they'd be butthurt, like, I ninth level spells, you know?
Right. Well, it's around that time, around level 9-ish, generally, that at that point, everybody's, if they've actually saved up any money for it, any gold for it, that they start, getting into getting a keep and things like that, getting their strongholds. And at that point, they figure, well, now I've got to take care of all this. So I'm just going to retire. We're going to start new characters and start over. So then you have the guys who are basically working for their previous characters and or followers of them or something like that. So it gets
Okay.
pretty fun. It gets interesting.
So you're telling me that it goes good with long games, and that you could do legacy play from your last
Yep.
answer.
Just like any other system. Absolutely.
Well, okay, just like any other system in theory, but let's face it, who here really wants to do legacy gaming with Pathfinder First Edition? Our characters hit 21st or 22nd level, and we're going to start our new characters as their putzes. I don't see you
Right.
guys doing that. I don't see it happening. Um, so you've been running a few games here and there. Uh, as a GM, is it easy to add content?
Yeah, definitely.
And I know that's a softball question, but that's a question that like whenever you're saying I'm going to add content, do you have to worry about like a complex mathematical or mechanical formulae, or do you just like narrate it down like I'm going to add this house with these features in it, blah, and that's it?
Yeah, there's really not a lot of thinking to do with most of that. Now, if you're, you know, getting into creating monsters and spells and things of that nature, or, creating a new class, then you have to pay a little more attention because you don't want things, excuse me, things to be overpowered, breaking or whatever. I don't know, breaking would be the actual,
I
but
don't know if you can actually break swords and wizardry
you really
mechanically.
can't. I mean, there's nothing you can do that's so OP that you can't do something to fix it,
Okay.
which is one of the great things about it. It might take a little creative thinking to figure out how you're going to fix it without, having the players just quitting, but yeah, there's nothing, you can't really break the system, but it doesn't take a whole lot to really just, create things to drop into your game. I mean, I have one of my games where one of the guys really wanted to play a half orc, and he'd played a half orc in my third edition game, and he was just freaking hilarious. So I was like, okay, dude, you got to play a half orc in my game then, if you want. So he was all about that. So we created a half orc for him, and it at first I was like, oh crap, this is gonna suck, because I was I was used to swords and wizardry, but I hadn't done anything like custom content like that. So I was kind of like, oh crap, this is gonna totally just be wrecked when wrecked. But it actually worked out pretty well. Had a lot of fun with that one.
Okay. I was reading in Frog God Games, the Discord server, that the Oriental area, and don't tell my players in my games that there's an Oriental area, because then they're going to try to be like, I want to play ninja, I want to play samurai. Those don't exist. They don't. Players watching from my home table games, those classes don't exist. They're not a thing in this world. That might be in the rule book, not in your table though. Have
I
fun.
haven't looked at any of the Oriental based stuff for the was it not Livinos?
Libnos has some Oriental adventure themed items too, but it's really on the east of the map. They have that large continent. The southern quarter of it is
Yeah,
huge into the Oriental mysticism, and
I
they've
think
got
there's some Oriental and some Indian and
yeah.
something. But I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to most of that. I haven't, you know, I've pretty much, for the most part, I've stuck with, most of the borderland provinces. I haven't really expanded much out of that, other than running Tomb of the Iron King, which at the time I don't think was even set in any particular location, but now they have it in Libanos, I think.
I've been hearing about that module. I need eventually to get a hold of it.
Yeah, that one was from like the core era. But yeah, like I said, I don't think it was actually part of any setting when they released it. It was just like an introductory module. Basically, it was the Grimsgate of the core rules, is what it essentially was.
You're not
But
hurting my feelings here. Grimsgate is one of the best adventure modules ever written.
I am gonna, yeah, I do. When it comes to introductory modules to get players hooked into a game, I swear by Grimsgate. I freaking love this module. It's easy to run. It's easy, and it's got all the essential components to get characters into learning to play their characters, that sort of thing. Um, you got a couple of traps trying to figure out where the treasure's at, opening doors, all these features and then the monsters themselves. Um, and the monsters themselves are great because you have, I don't want to spoil too much, but you have certain monsters that aren't as powerful as you're going to think they'd be, but it's enough to scare the shit out of the players. So you got all these components that just mash really well together, and then you have the town in outside of the dungeon too, which is pretty good for what it is. It's pretty good for the setting in general if you're not really paying too much attention to it. And then you have a couple of outdoor adventures as well, so you've got a little bit of everything there. But I've had a couple of my groups that I run Grimsgate with, and they basically just turned rebuilding the town into a whole other like adventure in itself. It was just amazing. I mean, Grimsgate became like a central focus of the entire campaign. It was awesome.
Hmm. That sounds like it actually worked out pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we finished the game with actually rebuilding the Elder Temple itself. It was freaking awesome.
All right. Panthalastic Nerdity says nothing much. Oh, and it's pronounced like Reese. This is the Witch King here, in case you didn't know. Well, welcome to our stream. I appreciate you stopping by.
And thanks for showing up, guys.
Um,
Finally
I
get to
do.
see my ugly mug on cam, right?
Hey, it all. I tell you what, the game is the game. Okay, well, not all of us can be celebrities like you. Okay, Houston.
I'm no celebrity.
uh,
I've got what, a few posts on my blog and one YouTube video up.
Everybody has to start somewhere. I started 10 years
And
ago.
the Swords and Wizardry character sheet to my publishing record. Yeah.
That's not a bad deal. I mean that's a really good thing to have. I like S&W myself.
Oh
Um, I gotta say, I mean, you have a very easy to play system. You have a very uh, quick intro as to how to get players sitting down. Um, is there any game system as a GM, as a referee or host? What would you is there another game system out there that you feel stacks well compared to this, or do you feel like this is it? This is the game you're going to retire with.
yeah. Okay. I love Swords and Wizardry. This is my go-to system. Don't get me wrong. But it's not my ultimate favorite system. The one I love more than anything above Swords and Wizardry is Dark Dungeons.
Okay, now we're going to need to do an aside real quick. This is not an endorsement for Dark Dungeons,
No.
but this is something that's your game that you would
Right.
rather get involved with.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, but for the most part, do you find it easier to get people into swords and wizardry?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's easy to get. It's as far as old school retro clones and games go. I've found Swords and Wizardry more easily grabs people than any of the others out there. Now that's been my personal experience. That's what I've seen. Even in you know different Discord servers and G plus groups at the time. I've probably seen more people coming from other systems, other newer systems to Swords and Wizardry than any other system I've seen. I mean, a lot of them come in for the Frog God games, Necromancer games, setting stuff for Pathfinder and things like that too. But as far as like the old school stuff, I don't think I've seen anybody draw more people, draw more new players and newer generation players that have been growing up on fourth and fifth than what I know Swords and Wizardry has done.
Okay. Um, Last question I really want to ask here before I open
Okay.
up potential floodgates for. I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of people storm our chat from the chat to the panel, but I do want to ask. Um, you've got somebody at a game store, and they've got the complete Swords and Wizardry rulebook in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
What do you help them? What do you say to them to where they either go up and buy it from the retailer or they follow you back to the table area and they sit down and create a character with you? What would you say to them?
I would tell them, let's see, if I just walked into a game store and I saw somebody holding that in their hand, looking at it, debating, I would probably go and say, hey, dude, that's great freaking system. I run it all the time. It's, I don't know what I would actually say to them. I would, definitely give them that encouragement, dude, the system
Can you
rocks.
port fifth edition modules to Swords and Wizardry pretty easily in your head and then interpret it on the fly to your players?
I have actually been doing that. Running up near the Rappahannock area or Rappahannock area in the Borderlands with the because I can't find a was it I couldn't find a Swords and Wizardry version of Adventures in Selkirk's Ferry. So I've actually been running that stuff with my group currently with the fifth edition version and just translating that pretty much on the fly. So like I'll go through and figure out about what they're going to be doing or what I think they're going to be doing, and I'll go through and kind of do some quick prep on that, converting it to the S&W stuff. But it's been really easy, honestly.
Okay. And that's something that I have to ask because whenever I open up an adventure module I like, but it's not written for what I run,
Right,
can I port it over?
right. As far as now translating it from Swords and Wizardry to another edition, it's probably going to be a little beyond me. You might want to leave that to what's his name, Mark. Mark, the Pathfinder converter at Frog Guy Games. I'm
Oh,
gonna leave that to
Michael
somebody
Mars.
like him or somebody that's more familiar with Pathfinder.
You're talking about Michael Mars.
Yes, that's basically what he does. And then somebody like you who spends a lot of time playing Pathfinder, it would probably be easier for you to like convert the other direction. For me, I'd probably struggle with that. But converting, other stuff to Swords and Wizardry, for the most part, I find pretty easy. Sometimes I have to kind of power things down a little bit, or in some cases, power things up a little bit to keep it from being too challenging or from not challenging enough. But the overall transporting things into from another system, it's been fairly easy.
And
Like the
Panthelastic
5e
Nerd
stuff, I
just
mean,
said,
I've been doing that almost on the fly, with very little prep ahead of time, and it's worked out great.
fair enough. Fair enough. Um, well, I don't want to get into a whole lot of other discussion on other items real quick because I mean, this could be the first in a very long line of DM chats between just you and me on various things. But I was really curious about Swords and Wizardry. I've got it in my library. Have I cracked it open more than 4 times? No. It is a very simple system to read. It is a very introductory feeling system, but my players don't want to play that, so I have to get new players if they want to play Swords and Wizardry.
Yeah.
Um,
Swords and Wizardry is the staple of my library at this point. So.
okay, now I'm going to ask you a personal question here.
Okay.
On our StreamYards, we've got SD Houston Brewlab Gaming. What is Brewlab Gaming?
Brewlab Gaming is just my little. And initially, I needed a name for my, a decent name for my blog and for a couple of projects I was working on, and so I just kind of put everything under Brewlab Gaming, which came from a Brewlab Productions. I
Okay,
kind of borrowed it from that when I was doing my I was getting into doing stop motion animation for a little while.
okay.
So, and I was just thinking, like a cauldron and a wizard, a boiling cauldron and like a wizard's lair, mixing up potions and things. And I was like, Brew
That's an
actually,
evocative name for a company.
that
I'll
whole,
just say
yeah,
that.
I was like, that would be like I mean, just that whole image, I was like, that's perfect. So I went with that, and that's what I run my blog under. And so,
Okay. Panthelastic Nerdity says, I just noticed I was behind in the video. Now I know why you guys did not respond. Sorry about that. I'm really sorry. We didn't notice it until about 2 minutes later. But
I honestly haven't seen anything in chat. Of course, I'm not even sure I'm on the right thing. I see private chat. I should probably go to comments, maybe.
comments.
Holy crap! Look at that. I didn't even realize that was there. I thought maybe. Awesome.
Yeah, that'll be appearing as a live chat whenever we send this over to YouTube or whenever this is a finalized video. But I was just kind of curious because you have Brewlab Gaming there, and I wanted to know more about my guest. This is probably the first in the long line of some interviews that I'm going to be starting here on the channel intermittently. I still have a day job. I really love my day job. I know that sounds crazy, but as a septic tank technician and fleet manager, I love my job. I love the fact that I know I'm going to go make good money when I wake up. I'm going to go and do some stuff. I'm going to make some happy people, and then I'm going to make my boss happy. And that's very crazy, but I really enjoy that. Uh, yeah, I got off work at 8 o'clock tonight. That happens, but I had to talk to you about Swords and Wizardry because whenever I heard you in the Frog God chat, you sounded like you were kind of floundering. You wanted to make a video review, and let's get it out. Let's get it done.
Yeah,
Like
I
let's
was
not
trying
worry
to.
about it. Let I am not a director for a video series that's going to do 40 edits from 30 camera angles. No, I'm very much Roger Corman. We're going to get it on the film, we're going to cut it, and it's going to ship. And that's how it goes.
Yeah, well, I was trying to do. I mean, the whole thing was just me sitting here like this for the most part, with a couple of little cuts in there between a couple of sections. But the plan was to just do a review on Swords and Wizardry, and I wanted to break it up into a couple of different segments, like what is Swords and Wizardry, and then another segment on basically explaining why it works so well. And so I was trying to record the first section of the clip, and every time I get it and I play it back, I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I can break here and start on another clip, and I play that clip back, and I'm like listening to myself, and it sounds like I'm just mumbling and slurring words, or I'm stumbling over words, and it just screws the whole thing up, and I'm like,
No,
holy
no.
crap! So I've got like I literally just a little while like earlier deleted like 78 clips of me just totally screwing up. I was like, oh my
No,
God, this is ridiculous.
I don't need you to make clips that you'll later discard because you're not happy with it. I need you to be able to feed the information to our viewers here. And Panthelastic Nerdity just said, I hope you two can do a review QA of the RPG Dark Dungeons eventually, at least. That is on the hopper.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'm down.
I'm down for that too.
Because I know Riz is like me. He's a huge Dark Dungeons fan. So
See, I'm not Dark Dungeons guy, but if you talk to me about Beckme Rule Cyclopedia, I'm there.
that's Dark Dungeons.
Okay. With that being said, and I'm not trying to throw too much happiness towards Dark Dungeons with this video. I wanted to really to focus on
Wizardry. I know.
Exactly, and there's a lot of reasons for that because there's a lot of people out there don't know what tabletop role playing games are. They just know from Critical Role. They know from maybe watching somebody else play, but they don't have their own experience. And I really feel that if you sit somebody down with a very rule light system and have that Q&A session between the referee and the player, like what's encouraged in Swords and Wizardry, I honestly think that they're going to have their own chance to have their own red box moment. And when I say red box moment, they're going to have that moment where they're like, oh my God, I get it. This is exactly why I sat down today to play this game. I killed an orc, and they have that moment of euphoria where they understand exactly what they're doing in this fantasy millennium. And it doesn't need to have a complex mechanical equation to it. They just need to be able to have that back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got that. That's one of the beautiful things about it, especially that first time the first session or two that you sit down and play the game, is you get those moments where, you get through this just seemingly impossible encounter and, you get through it and you get this battle. You've killed the goblins or the kobolds or whatever it is, and you get that, then you find that big treasure, you get that moment of triumph. You're just like, yes, and then you get that first character death and you're just like heartbroken, but so you get that whole spectrum of emotions, just off of this little game. It's just amazing.
And I think this is a good video to start with the interview series because Swords and Wizardry is a very good, very basic style game that very much lends itself to house rules. And you can add rules to the game if you see fit. If you want to make it more complex, go ahead. It's your game now, right?
Absolutely. And the great thing about it is one of the great things about it too is it's one of those systems that, like I was explaining earlier, the whole book right here, it's 130 plus pages. 130 of it is the actual rules. The last few pages are just the index of character sheet page and a picture with, a picture or something to do with Ardoc or something. Um, so anyway, you got 130 pages of rules. Okay. And only the first 73 are actually the character, or actually for the player. So you get a character, or you get a player that, let's say, all they've done is, they've never actually picked up a D&D 5th edition rulebook. They've just done everything on D&D Beyond, or you get a brand new player playing games. Okay.
Sure.
You show them this. You tell them, you know what? Only the first half of the book. You only have to worry about the first half of the book, and you only need to worry about what you want to worry about in the first half. If you don't want to be a spellcaster, you can eliminate a third, half of the first half of the book. Okay, now you take something like this, and say, all right, so we're playing a game. Here's the rules. Which one's going to be less intimidating?
Yeah, I need 130 pages.
Don't get me wrong, this is a great
page monster.
system, but you get a brand new player or somebody that's done everything online on D&D Beyond. Which one do you think is going to be less intimidating?
I need players that just want to go.
Exactly.
And
And that's the
so,
beauty of it. You can go in there and say, hey, look, all right, what do you want to, what class, what race do you want to play? Okay, great. So let's figure out let's figure out your hit points. Let's figure out your armor class, and if you're going to be a spellcaster, let's figure out a couple of spells to get you started. Boom, you're ready to roll, some basic equipment. Let's go. Any other details, you can flesh those out along the way. You don't even need all that right up front to get the adventure started. You try to do that with, 5th edition, 4th edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, you're going to find yourself in a little bit of trouble along the way trying to figure it all out. But
I'm not going to disagree with you on that. That is the problem with the newer systems that seem to be trying to break your back with all the rule books you're supposed to carry with you, and I'm not really into that.
yeah, and then you either spend 2 to 3 hours trying to create a character, and if you don't have a spare character made up before your character dies, if he dies, you just miss the rest of the game right there, unless you're like 5th edition using D&D Beyond, but when you get to the point where you have to use software to create a character in any half-ass decent amount of time just to get into the game or get back into the game, that's
That's
a little too heavy for me.
that's really why I don't like Pathfinder, because it requires that software, that hero labs, and my players just can't seem to break that. They can't stop sucking on that tit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah,
anyway,
there's a point where all these options and availabilities and everything just they're no longer useful tools. They're crutches.
exactly. And whenever you want to pick up a game, you really don't. I'm going to quit painting for a minute. I've quit painting for a while, but the when you pick up a game, there are times where you really don't want to have crutches. You want to shove the players into a situation and get them rolling as quick as possible.
Oh yeah.
You want to get them in the action. You want to make them feel like heroes. You want to embolden them.
Yep.
And so that's the main thing that when I see rule light systems, I get excited about. You talk
Oh
to me about swords and wizardry. Okay, I'm ready to play. I have my index card character sheet. I have my index card for my backpack and what's in there. I'm good. I've got everything I need to play. We have a D20. We have a D6. Nothing else. Let's go.
yep.
You know.
I
Um,
love index cards. I've used index cards forever. I've even when I was a player, like I'll have an index card and I'll write like some whatever supplies and stuff, as basic supplies. If I find stuff along the way, I'll write them on there. As a DM, those are my bread and butter when it comes to the monsters I have lined up for my adventures. I literally have all monsters and their stats laid out on the index card. So when comes up in an encounter, I just flip to that index card, pull it out, boom, there we go.
So whenever you're playing a game, what all do you need to play if you're going to run swords and wizardry? What is the requisite items for the judge, for the referee?
For the GM for Swords and Wizardry, dice, of course, game
Okay.
screen if you're gonna hide some of your rolls, which I recommend in a lot of cases, so that you're not giving things away and you're not just you leave some aspect there. That's another discussion entirely. All right, so miniatures or tokens if you're using maps, graph paper for your player if they need some more, graph papers and pencils for your mapper, assuming you're doing it that way, which I generally tend to do. Um, the rule book, monster books if you have them. Just
What monster books do they have out?
um, you got the Tomb of Horrors, you got Monstrosities, you've got OE Reloaded, which was actually for core rules, but works perfectly well with complete.
Okay.
Um, which yeah, so you got a few of those there, a few options there. Um, I Tomb of Horrors complete. So there's a few.
All right. Um, I'm finished with my questions. It sounds like as a GM, you're going to spend about $40 to maybe $70 finding whichever rule book that you're getting online and shipping with Amazon. But you're going to spend about that much for the hardcover.
Yep.
Uh, you're going to need dice. Most of us have dice. Miniatures if you're going to play with minis.
Right.
but it sounds like a very low investment cost for the
Yes.
game itself. You can add as much rules as you want. It's very light. It lends itself very well to house rules.
Hold that thought. I'm sorry. I'll be right back.
Okay. While he's doing that, I'll just focus in on the figs that we've been painting over the past couple hours. I was waiting in chat for him to finally finish with my Hill Giant Warlord. Finally finished with my 2 Manticores, which I purchased at the Printed Meeple, which is a nice game store in San Antonio. Yeah, I've got a lot of figs. I'm sorry. Not sorry. When you have the ability to be a hobbyist, you collect shit, and that just happens. Some of you have a lot of comic books, so I understand. He had run off for a restroom break. I'm hearing him. Okay.
All right. I'm back.
All right. Welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that emergency situation.
You're fine, Houston. Got to ask you just one more question. On in terms of like for swords and wizardry,
Yes.
have you played any games online?
Um, for the last couple of years, pretty much all my gaming has been online. Um, more or less just out of necessity due to my job, but
Well, yeah,
hopefully,
you are for a while you were a long haul trucker, correct?
yes.
Okay. As a long haul trucker, most people don't associate that vocation with gamer.
No, most people don't. It can be difficult being a gamer when you're on the road all the time. But
Yeah,
where
left
there's a
time
will, there's
trucking.
a way. Which means that I had to make a lot of exceptions, working around the ability to use or working around the fact that I didn't have the ability to use a lot of VTTs, like virtual tabletops.
Hmm.
So I was working, off of like my phone or tablet or my laptop with what little hotspotting off my phone with what bit of a internet connection I could get on that. Um, Using like whiteboards, whiteboard programs and things like that. And so I managed to make it work.
That's that's dedication to a craft and a hobby right there.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
there's a part of me that wants to celebrate you right there because I was a trucker and I did not game on the road. I would come back home and run on Sundays on my 34-hour reset. I was lucky,
Yep.
but I had a really good crew of people that waited week to week to play, and that was like what they wanted to do. They were happy with Sunday games. Um, is there anything you want to add to chat? Like, are you working on a blog right now? Is there a video that you're getting ready to release on your YouTube channel? What are you focused on right now? Aside from, I mean, you and I are both day laborers or skilled laborers, I call it, even though we're truckers. I consider that skilled labor. But in terms of our hobby, what are you working on right now?
Okay, so right now I am working on my blog. Trying to get about a post a week up. Usually releasing those late Wednesday night, early Thursday mornings. Um, Hopefully I'm gonna get two up before Thursday morning. We'll see how that goes.
What is your what I'm going to need you to send me a link in Discord so I can link that in the discussion or in the
Yes.
description for this video.
Okay. Yeah. I will put that in there. But it is brewlabgaming.com.
Brewlabgaming.com. Okay.
Brewlabgaming.com. And I'm working on, I've got a page on there with my Azabron, my homebrew setting. But that's undergoing, I haven't done a whole lot of change on that yet. updating it, but that setting is currently going under a huge overhaul. Expanding the territory. I've got the map of the setting up there, but I'm expanding the territory, converting it. I'm adding. It's going to be 6 kingdoms, five of which one of which is one big massive kingdom. The other five are smaller kingdoms that were formed into an empire, and it's going to be this kind of Warhammer-esque influence to it, and it's going to be a lot of political intrigue and border wars and skirmishes, and a lot of it's going to be pretty intense.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm going to share my screen just for a moment and pop over to the
Yes.
actual campaign set you have here.
Yeah. Now the original map I did as a hex map, and the hex map was pretty good. And then Dirk Collins, back when we were still on G Plus, actually did that version of the map for me, and he just did an amazing freaking job on it.
I'm really digging the little bit of flavor text you have here under your map. And I'm
Thanks.
hoping that others that see this video that want to get involved with gaming at least come over here and check out what you're doing, because that looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hoping so. I'm going to be finding out pretty soon because I'm doing a couple of different versions of that. One version of that is going to be for my upcoming OD&D game, my OE original D&D game, and then the other version is going to be for another game I have upcoming. I've got to stop at 3 games. I can't do any more than that, but I'm doing 3. Um, is going to be a Castles and Crusades game. I'm going to be running that in that setting as well. So it's going to be really. This is. I've run some basic swords and wizardry in the setting as it currently is, but with the new overhauls that I'm doing right now, this is going to be really interesting to see just how well these new aspects work out with the setting. So these are going to be essentially play testing the new version of the setting. So it's going to be.
That sounds pretty fun. That sounds really fun.
Yeah. This setting is 8 years in the making. Oh,
That's pretty impressive.
yeah.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up our stream here, and I'd like to thank you for showing up for this interview. I know you had to do some preliminaries and make sure that things were going to be a go. Um, Probably within the next couple of weeks, we'll set aside a date on Discord and set up our next kind of like a Q&A session. Panthalastic Nerdity had a question, and I think we could probably go in the after party and discuss that a little bit further. But I I wanted to thank you, and I want to thank the viewers that watched us live, and for those of us that watch us later on. If you have any questions, please put those down in the comment section. If you like what you see here, I'm going to send you to a place called froggodgames.com. They are the producers of Swords and Wizardry. I'm going to send you to Uncle Matt's little DM YouTube channel where he has a couple of campaigns, the Swords of Jordoba.
Swords of Jordoba, yes, I love
Yes,
watching that. I've gone through and rewatched those
that is
countless
a
times.
for you game masters out there that want to hone your ability at the craft. Watch those series, and take good notes, because Matt shows you what experienced referees can do with a bare bones campaign rule set. He goes through just a litany of trials for his players to
Oh
endure,
yeah.
and
If
it's
you want to
fun.
know how to play a Kenku properly, those are the videos to watch.
I agree.
If you
I
want to know
agree.
how to run your Kenku and PCs properly, you've got to watch those.
Mr. Houston, thank you for showing up in tonight's adventure, or for tonight's interview. Uh, if there's any question, do you have any questions for me, sir, before we head offline?
Not that I can think right offhand, but I
All right.
appreciate you having me on, Bruce. It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Let me end the broadcast here, and I thank you all so much for watching us.